Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Tony Bitzionis and I'm here as always with my lovely friend and co-host, Alex Perala. Alex, hello.
Hello.
Today we have a very special guest. We're joined by Nicole McNamee-Wicks, Director of Biometric Cybersecurity at FaceTec. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Uh, Before we get into some other topics, I think I'd like to start with just telling us about yourself and your background working for the government. I believe you worked for the Social Security Administration Office of the Inspector General, or the SSA OIG, as I call it. Um, Tell us a little bit about your experience and what brought you to FaceTech.
Sure. I actually just retired in January, just before the fork in the road, after over 30 years of federal service. Most of them were as a special agent with the SSA OIG. 20 of those years I worked out of the New York State Intelligence Center. I also worked as a special agent with the Immigration Naturalization Service when they still existed. So I'm dating myself quite a bit. But, I dealt with a lot of identity theft, a lot of fraudulent documents for many, many years. And, you know, working for an agency that was the de facto identifier for the United States when it wasn't meant to be was very frustrating because, you're basing people's identities on something that didn't have the guardrails to do that. So as everyone knows, people's lives can be completely devastated by identity theft. So I'm dealing with victims whose, lives are completely destroyed. And going after the criminals is great, but the reality was that there's so much of it out there. And a lot of times, if it was only a financial loss, the criminals really, got a slap on the wrist. There was no jail time. Maybe they paid some of the money back. And so it really was no deterrent. And, you know, in comes FaceTec, where I was just blown away by their technology because they actually have a solution to protect people's identities. And I was given an opportunity to be part of that, which is, like that's what I want to do my whole career, right? I wanted to protect these people instead of just mopping up afterwards. So it was just really exciting. And, I am skeptical being in law enforcement for decades, right? But I think that what spoke the most volumes about this company was their spoof bounty, right? So
Mm.
not only were they saying, hey, our technology is amazing, they were saying, we want to keep it amazing. And not only are we going to prove it's amazing and keep it amazing, but we're going to ask you to break it and pay you
Mhm.
up to $600,000. And I don't
Mhm.
know of like any better message than that to say our stuff is great, and
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
that I was just blown away by them completely.
yeah.
Yeah, it's we've been covering that for years, the spoof bounty program, and it is weird that there aren't more companies doing that. Like it kind of is
Right? Yeah.
a bit of a black pill, so to speak, if you're watching the tech space. But I also, I mean, we run a news site and anytime anybody has an issue with something we wrote, they can email the editor. It's like standard practice where we want our product to be perfect.
Mhm.
We want it to do the job it's supposed to do, which is accurately give information to people. And so it's the same kind of concept. Like, why wouldn't you want people to stress test that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's great. And then there's also, I mean, the newest solution. I'm assuming that when you were started talking to FaceTech, they at that point they had unveiled the UR code. So I'm guessing that this was probably the thing that kind of impressed you to begin with, or at least caught your interest. Is that right?
Yeah, so the UR code is quite amazing, right? It's a digitally signed biometric barcode that's been minified to 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter, or three-quarter of an inch by three-quarter of an inch. And and it doesn't lose, any of its accuracy by being minified.
Mm.
So now you have something that can be, put on an ID card. It's small enough and it's accurate enough, and it binds people to that identity document.
Mhm. Yeah, and to be clear, it's not like it is a QR code, but it encodes biometric information together with biographic information, right? So it's like it's basically like a complete identity encoded in just that QR code, right?
Correct. So it looks exactly like a QR code. The only difference you're going to see is there's a little UR in the center, so you know it's a UR code.
Mhm.
But you interact with it exactly the same as you'd interact with a QR code. Any smart device can interact with this code. But as you said, so not only do you have the facial vector data, it's not an image, it's facial vector data, so it's privacy preserving. You can't extract a facial image out of there. But whoever is the encoding agency can select what information they want. It's completely customizable.
Mhm. And
Mhm.
when you say encoding agency, like that, from what we understand, that could be anything, right? Like it could be law enforcement, I guess, or but it could be a federal government in theory, or it could be a company, or basically anyone who needs to issue an ID, right?
It really can. And it's so, I mean, right now it's free to government agencies, law enforcement, not for profit. So, schools, hospitals, county clerks, you name it. Anybody can really use this because what you're talking about is using a UR code to secure as little as a piece of paper, right? You can take
Mhm.
a piece of paper now and make it a secure document.
Mhm.
Mhm. Can you just talk a little bit about, because you spent a lot of years working in law enforcement and working for the federal government, and now you're a civilian. Um, how does this technology make people like yourself their jobs easier? Like if you had this back when you were working, would it just be you'd be like, oh, this is exactly what I need? Like what the technology is doing, how does that make your job easier?
So, like I said, I dealt with a lot of fraudulent ID documents over the years, and a lot of documents that do have security features, such as like the PDF 417 barcode that you see on driver's licenses, they require special readers, right? And I didn't have those special readers. At any given time here in the United States, there's over 300 different variations in driver's licenses. I don't know what those look like. Take ID cards, right? Like take law enforcement ID cards. There's over 18,000 law enforcement agencies. I don't know what their ID cards look like. I mean, I'll go back to my 9/11 response day. So I was in New York City, and all of us law enforcement that were in New York City, stationed in New York City, we ended up being stationed or detailed over to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And we all did all of our tasks. But one day I found myself that I was perimeter security and for our command center that was on the Intrepid. And so it was my job that day to check the IDs of my fellow law enforcement to let them into this secure facility armed.
Mhm.
And, we had all these law enforcement entities converge on New York City. I don't know what any of their IDs look like. Most of us
Mhm.
are plain clothes. Most of us looked like we hadn't, bathed or anything in days. We all looked like crazy people. So it was like, and I'm looking at these IDs that literally look like they were printed in people's basements.
Mhm.
And, okay, you look like a cop today, I'll let you in. And the reality is that stuff hasn't really changed, right? We have different secure facilities and we're asking people to be an expert in all of these documents, and it's just not possible, right?
Yeah.
So, and especially one of the things we have down here is HR 218 in the United States. It allows retired law enforcement to carry their weapon after they retire throughout the United States.
Mhm.
Right.
And I recently got my card, and it really doesn't have, well, one, no one's going to know what a Social Security OIG agent's HR 218 card should look like, right? Because
Right.
how many are going to be out there, right? So no one's going to know what it looks like. And remember, these are new, so really no one knows what anybody's look like. They're all different, and there's really no security feature on them.
Mhm.
So then you're supposed to couple them with a couple other things, which is my state permit for my pistol permit, which that doesn't have any safety features on it, and no one's going to know what that looks like because it was issued in up in the Adirondacks. So no one's going to have a clue what that looks like. And then I have a third one that was issued by where I took the course, which again, how many people are giving the course to certify me that, and so I have these three cards that really no one knows what they should look like, and they really
Mhm.
don't have any safety features.
Yeah.
Now, wouldn't it be nice if I don't need to know any of that, right? Like, I don't need to know what any of them look like. I can just scan this UR code. This UR code then will validate that it's digitally signed, that it was issued by the agency that is said to be the issuing agency,
Mhm.
and that it's a genuine UR code. And
Mhm.
then the next phase of this, which is really super cool, and it's a great user interface. So the first thing you do is you scan the UR code. It does those three verifications for you, but then it gives you an oval to put that person's face in,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and then it tells you to a 99.999% accuracy rate whether that person is the holder of that document.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I mean, that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
Because you look at the studies, people get it wrong at least 30% of the time. And that's when people aren't even trying that hard, right? Like if I get a really good doppelganger, I'm going to get that ID through.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
this technology, really, I mean, you're talking about a 1 in 100,000 false acceptance rate when the bar is set at 1 in 10,000.
By the way, Tony, we got to get a couple HR 218s for our side project that we were talking about. Just to bracket that.
I'll add it
Uh,
to the list in our schemes list, Alex.
so yeah, it sounds like first of all, we need to get UR codes like integrated with these badges in particular immediately.
Yeah.
It sounds like it should be a priority. Um,
I feel like it should be prioritized all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's so many documents out there that just aren't secure.
Yeah, and that's such a that use case specifically. I mean, I was just trying to picture the scenarios where you would need to show those documents and who you might be showing them to. And to think that somebody who's a security person at, I don't know, like an airport, sure, but about like a fair or a ball game or something, expecting those people to know what all this paperwork looks like is it's not, it's just impossible. It's unreasonable. And um, for them, the consequences would be for from everyone, the consequences would be huge to get that wrong. So having just a simple solution that gives you 99.999% accuracy it's just so huge.
mhm.
And the bigger part of that is it's free, right? It's free to those agencies, and it literally only costs them the real estate on the document and the ink. That's it. That's their only
Yeah.
cost. And the SDK, the software development kit, it operates behind their firewall. So there's no PII being sent to any third party. FaceTec isn't getting anything. It all stays behind there. So really, I mean, it's just scalable to, I mean, I don't even, it would be a shorter list of where you can't use these.
Mhm. I am kind of curious, like in practice, uh, does FaceTech have a list of authorized agencies that it's working with for these UR codes? Like, if you were in that position where you have to scan the UR code to verify that this was issued by the correct agency, who's managing like what the name of the agency that comes up? Someone can't like invent a fake agency pretending to be another one, like a legitimate one, and then issue its own UR code that way, right? It has to be like verified through FaceTech, I assume.
Right. So it's, I mean, you're using a public-private key to do that, the verification so that it stays privacy preserving. But when you first sign up, you have to have a domain that's verifiable to
Right.
put that public key on. So we're not, yeah. So it's not just going out to like, hi, I decided I am, federal agency, number one. So no, it's you have to have something that's verifiable up front. But once you do that, the data's not going to FaceTech. They're not getting that, oh, this UR code was scanned, and they're not getting, they don't have a list of every UR code that's encoded.
Right. And I guess it is like that kind of has a built-in privacy feature as well in a way because the issuing agency can decide like nobody needs to know your address. They just need to know you work for us, something like that.
Yeah, 100%. So when you'll see that when you start seeing these, you'll see it's up to the encoding agency what data they want people to see, right? What
Hmm.
they want visible when you scan that UR code. So like mine that's on my business card, it literally is my name, my agency, and my contact information.
Hmm.
And you can put whatever you want in there. There's so many use cases for this. One of the jurisdictions that's looking at this, and it's a police jurisdiction, they actually have a very large vulnerable adult population, and they issue bracelets with a QR code. But the
Mm.
QR code literally is like, "Hi, I have Alzheimer's," and then they have to go into their database of hundreds of people and try to figure out, well, who is this person? So
Right.
they were saying if they could just replace that with the UR code, and then they can scan it. And now it says, "Hi, I'm Nicole McNamee. I have Alzheimer's. Here's my emergency contact information. Here's my address." Look how much time that saves. So it's whatever the encoding agency can think of that they need to be in there. Maybe it's just a document number. Maybe it's just, I'm Nicole and I'm number 111, and they know to go to that file. So they can completely customize it however is most useful to them.
Yeah, that's a great use case, by the way. Like a
Yeah.
good example of something I never would have thought of that, but I'm sure there's a million like that where we don't even realize there's this huge solution available now. Um, but I mean, on that note, I mean, we've been covering this for months now since it was launched, and we still have questions. So I'm assuming you're having to do a lot of educating, and FaceTech is as well. So can you tell us a bit about that? Like how how is FaceTech working to educate people and answer questions, and like what kind of assumptions and I don't know, tricky questions are you encountering from people who might not be familiar with the technology? Like how do you approach that? Because it is kind of a conceptual it's a conceptually complex solution, I think, more so than a lot of people would necessarily be prepared for, just like your average Joe on the street. So, how is FaceTech approaching that?
Well, so I mean, one of the biggest concerns of everybody always is privacy, right? That's the first thing they come to. And the assumption is always that PII is going somewhere because
Mm,
a lot of the biometric companies it is, right? It's going to a third party. So that's one of the biggest concerns. And when we explain, this is behind your firewall. This is something you have control of. This is not sending data anywhere. That's one of the biggest concerns of people. The fact that it's not an actual image in there, that you can't extract an image out of there. This is facial vector data. It's a string of data that you just can't extract. Explaining the digital signatures sometimes because people don't understand, like, well, why can't these be messed with? And so some people just don't know the basic barcoding technology. So, we're out, we're doing a lot of we're going to Identity Week, we're going to sheriff's conferences, we're going out there speaking as much as we can. One of our colleagues just got back from ID for Africa. So, we're trying to go as many places as we can to explain this technology and especially explain to governments that this is an option for them. It's not that expensive chip that they're using. That's really expensive technology. And a lot of government agencies don't have the money to spend. Like we were just speaking to somebody from the Virgin Islands, and they were explaining their titles. What by the time their titles get to the mainland, they often get rejected as fraudulent.
mm,
Hmm.
So, they were looking at this they don't have a lot of money. They don't print a lot of titles and they don't have a lot of money to secure that document. And they were like, this is probably a perfect use case for them where they can now secure that piece of paper literally again for real estate and the ink price.
mm.
Nicole, I wanted to ask you, you have an extensive background dealing with fraud. You're an expert. What's your take on what's going on in America? There's a fraud crisis happening. So what's your take on that situation?
So the most recent statistic, and I'm sure that it's increased since then that I was hearing is that there is a victim of identity theft every 22 seconds.
Wow.
And
Holy
I
moly.
would say it's definitely much more often because those are the people that are reporting it, right?
Right.
Right.
There's a lot of people, unfortunately, we victimize the victim a lot. So a lot of people don't want to admit that they were scammed. They're embarrassed about the fact that they were scammed. A lot of times it's a person they know or a person that a relationship evolved
Mm.
and they're scammed by that person. One, they don't want to believe it, especially if it's a family member, right? A lot of people don't want to believe it. And then they don't want to turn that person in. And
Hmm.
then, like I said, there's a lot of people that are just embarrassed. I worked with a lot of business owners that really didn't want to make complaints because they were so embarrassed of the level of fraud that they had encountered. So, that statistic is, I would say, really low.
Hmm.
At any given point, they say there's 14 million fake IDs floating around in the US. I mean, they're seizing them by the thousands. And the worst part is the people who actually do it for a living, so like the lab people who look at these things day in and day out, the fakes have gotten so good that a
Hmm.
lot of them actually require lab testing. So all this expensive stuff, all as one of my colleagues says, the sparkly shiny things that make things secure, the bad guys have those,
Yeah.
right? And they're putting them on the documents. So if you have the experts who do it for a living day in and day out that they can't tell just by looking at it, how can you expect the lay people?
Hmm.
So I guess the obviously the UR code solution to that fraudulent document issue is basically all of those are that they become useless because now it's a UR code that needs to be scanned. It's not some person's photo next to a bunch of printed information about them. It's literally like scan the code and it's either that person or it isn't, right?
I mean, I don't want to say throw the baby out with the bathwater and everything goes
Yeah,
away,
there still will
because
be
I think
IDs.
people are still going to want to see those things on documents, and I think it would be difficult for people to adopt, if when I give them a piece of paper, how secure it is. But the reality is, yes,
Yeah.
yes, you could. You
Hmm.
can do away. This can take that place. This can take the place of a chip, right? This secures it. You can put it in your digital wallet. Um, so yeah, it's like I said, a piece of paper can now be a secure document. You're going to start seeing these on interim licenses because right now there's no security on those. It's a piece of paper.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of other use cases that people are talking about that are kind of, interesting. Somebody was talking about non-transferable VIP tickets.
Mm.
Hmm.
Well, now imagine that. You send that out with a UR code, all the scalpers are out of business, right? Like, uh-oh, we can't resell these things because it's bound to that person who bought that ticket. They're talking about the possibility of, well, what if you had a high-end delivery, right? Like, so you have some very expensive product. Well, what if my UR code is attached to that
Right.
and you now know that it's definitely me that bought it and then me who's receiving the delivery?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good.
Again, like awesome little use cases that I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
But I guess like looking in the near term, it's not adoption won't start with those. Like it won't start with going after scalpers. So like what do you think is going to be the big killer app, so to speak, use case that will spur adoption of the UR codes? And if I can do a two-part question, I also am just a little bit curious, like I'd like to learn a little more about the FaceTec's, I guess, plan with rolling these out because you mentioned earlier, like the protocol is free and the SDK is free. A lot of things are being offered just for free. So, what is FaceTec's role in this like growing ecosystem of UR codes, I guess?
So the first, what was, wait, what was
Yeah,
the
the
first
first
question?
first things first, like what is the killer app that will drive adoption of UR codes if there is one or if it's like a bunch of things?
So I really think that seeing them on interim licenses, I think that that's going to be your first use case that is really going to make them adopt it, right? Because one, there's nothing there, and there should be something there to secure up those documents. And then there'll be a lot of them, right? So you're going to have people getting more comfortable with the technology as they're seeing it. And the more people see it, we're working with different DMVs to get it into their digital IDs. So once you start seeing these with different departments and motor vehicles, I think that others will adopt it more easily,
Mm,
right? There's so many use cases because you can actually put up to three facial vectors into these. So, you can have daycare scenarios where, who's picking up the child. You can have, you could go to amusement parks and be like, here's a family and, here's mom and dad if the child gets separated. I feel like the sky is the limit with these. And I
Hmm.
think that you will see them everywhere, especially because they're free, right? They're free to all
mm,
these entities. But they're important too. They're important to use. And you already have people who are so used to QR codes, right? We all I mean, the pandemic made us all interact with QR codes, right? We scanned our menus, we scanned everything. We weren't touching anything.
Yeah.
So, and then we have an app that is free. Another thing that's free. We have an app, which I happen to love the app because the app actually is very intuitive and it's kind of fun to interact with. So, you pull up the app and instantly a box pops up and you put your UR code in the box. And then, it shows you that it verified, as I said, the signature and everything like that. And then it instantly pops up that oval. And then, you verify the person and then it gives you, this nice big check mark, and it shows you the match. So I think that with that, and the other thing that with the app that's really neat is once it's initialized, it actually works offline.
right.
So
Okay.
that's a big thing. And the other thing, again, going back to it, of why I think that you're going to see this everywhere is there's no special reader. Anybody can read a UR code. Any camera can read a UR code. So you've now just empowered a lot of people who wouldn't be able to normally. You empower them to protect other people's identities, right? Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many stores I go into where it's like, well, if you open a credit card today, you'll get 20% off. Well, wouldn't it be nice if the store clerk would actually verify and be able to verify that it really is my ID that I'm giving them when they open that store card?
Mm, sure.
These are so I believe that this is going to be everywhere. I want it everywhere. I definitely want it on my deed, my property deed. That was a new fraud that came out that scares the heck out of me, right? Taking out a mortgage on your house when you're not paying attention.
Oh
So,
boy.
I would love to see it everywhere. I wish I could put it on all my stuff.
Well, I would too. Speaking for Tony, I'm sure we both would like to see it everywhere, except where it impacts our various side businesses, which we don't need to go into now.
No.
But
And if I ever get a house, I want it on my deed as well.
well, Tony, in Toronto, I can guarantee that'll never happen. So
Never
you don't
happened.
need to worry about that. But yeah, I say this basically every time we are talking to somebody about UR codes. I'm very, very excited to see where it goes from here. I'm guessing at this point you probably can't yet tell us if there's like specific deployments that are coming, unless.
There's a lot in the works. There's
Oh,
a lot of
he's
different ones in the works.
Okay,
so sneaky, Alex.
cool.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
I will say we did have a sheriff come online. I think actually maybe two that are going to be using them for their HR 218s and their
Oh,
ID
great.
cards. So they paved the way for the next ones to make it much smoother for all of us. So we are gracious to them for helping us to make things easier for everybody else. And um, me especially for they kind of helped me learn of what questions they had and how to answer things and maybe what wasn't as seamless as we thought. Maybe some things were a little bit more difficult to do. And so in FaceTec fashion, they of course made everything as frictionless as possible for that agency. And that's what FaceTec does is they just improve everything to make it more user friendly, to make it really easy. Just like that app, like I said, it's so intuitive, and that's how their technology is. It's just very intuitive.
Mm.
Yeah. And like we said at the top, and stand behind it with a spoof bounty and just kind of transparency. So that's all great. I'd like to point out for the record that when you noted that a few sheriffs are already looking to use it for the H2R or HR2, I said that's great. Alex looked distressed. Maybe like he had been foiled.
20, 20, please cut this. Nicole, Nicole, this has been great.
Thank you,
Thank you
Nicole.
so much, and I hope we'll talk again soon, especially as these things get rolled out. I think there'll be a lot more to talk about.
Definitely. I definitely think so.